The light closed, and the crowd of cars stopped in a hurry, impatient horns echoing between the city's tall buildings. There, in the midst of the noise and the hurry, walked a small, slight girl, with her hair messed up by the wind and the bare feet that already decorated the hot asphalt. Her name was Leah. She was 9 years old and had an expression that, even tired, insisted on carrying a smile. It wasn't the kind of smile learned from movies or magazines. It was one of those that are born from within, even when life does everything to snatch any joy. She walked among the cars with a small improvised bouquet in her hands. He was not a florist. It was just a child who, every day, woke up before the sun and went to that same busy intersection to sell flowers. Their wares did not come from fancy flower shops, but from squares, vacant lots, and forgotten sidewalks. Leon knew where the city's wildflowers grew and collected them carefully, as if picking stars fallen on the ground. The city seemed to have forgotten that it existed. For most, it was just another dirty child on the street trying to sell something. But Leah was not like the other boys who ran between cars begging for coins. She did not ask for alms. She offered flowers. And more than flowers, she offered affection. When she noticed someone with a drooping look, a tired face, with their eyes sunk in the pain of the world, Leah would approach, spread a flower carefully, and say, "This flower is for you to remember that there is still love in the world." It was simple, it was direct, and it came with the truth that only those who live on the streets, but still carry tenderness, can transmit. Not everyone accepted it. Some turned their faces. Others closed the window without looking. There were those who shooed her away as if she were a nuisance. And Leah, she didn't get angry. She just smiled and moved to the next car. She seemed to understand that many people's hearts are dirtier than the ground on which she walks. The traffic light was his stage. There, between the seconds that separated the green and the red, she distributed color in a gray world. The horns no longer scared her. He had already learned to dance between cars as if he were in an improvised ballet. And even though her knees were scraped and her stomach growled, her gaze did not lose its shine. It was as if, somehow, Leon knew that her mission was more than selling flowers to survive. It was to remind people of something they had forgotten, the delicacy of a simple gesture. Some mornings were more difficult than others. There were days when the rain seemed to be punishment, soaking her thin dress and making the flowers lose their color. There were nights when the cold made her shiver, hidden under a piece of cardboard in the back of a closed store. And there were silent dawns, where longing tightened in the chest as if it wanted to suffocate. She missed her mother, whose face she still tried to remember before going to sleep. The image was already blurring in his memory, but the smell was still alive. A soft scent of lavender and warm lap. Leah didn't know what a new toy was, or an afternoon snack, but she knew well the sound of an empty belly and the taste of stale bread shared with other boys like her. Even so, he kept in himself a purity that the world had not yet been able to steal. Whenever there was a flower left, she didn't think about selling it. She was looking for someone sad, someone who needed a gesture of love more than she did. It was common to see her approaching stressed drivers, mothers crying at the wheel, gentlemen with lost eyes. She reached out, handed the flower, and said in a low but firm voice, "This is to remind you that there is still love in the world." And, as much as many did not notice, there was always someone who, upon receiving that unexpected gift, cried softly, not out of pity for the girl, but out of shame for having forgotten that there is still beauty, even in the hardest corners of life. One day, Leah woke up earlier than usual. The sky was still dark, but she was already on her feet. Her work called her. With a bag on his back, he went to a nearby square where he knew purple flowers bloomed at dawn. He picked it up with delicacy. He cleaned it with his hands. He arranged the small bouquets as if preparing a gift for someone very special. Because for her, each flower delivered was just that, a gift, a piece of her affection, even if almost no one returned a smile. As she walked toward the traffic light, she felt the eyes of the city closing on her. Men in suits dodged. Women held their purses tighter. Young people laughed, pointing. But none of this shook her. Leah was made up of a faith that could not be explained. A faith in the good, even without receiving. A faith in love, even without having it. A faith in life, even when everything said it wasn't worth it. When she arrived at the light, she found the same scenario as always. Cars honking, salespeople running, people closing the window when they saw her approaching. But on that day, something different was about to happen. A black car, imposing, stopped right in front. Inside, a woman with sunglasses, a serious face, and a distant look. Liao felt something strange in that look. It was as if sadness was disguised as arrogance. He approached carefully, holding a yellow flower. "Take it. It's for you to remember that there is still love in the world," she said, with that smile that only she knew how to give. The woman looked her up and down, frowned, and turned her face away. He did not answer. He did not accept. And, like someone chasing away an insect, he made a gesture with his hand, asking it to get out of the way. The window went up slowly, and the car drove off impatiently as soon as the light opened. Liao stood still holding the flower. For a moment, his smile faltered. But soon she took a deep breath, tucked her hair behind her ear, and headed to the next car, because she knew she couldn't stop. Not when there were still so many people forgetting that love exists. If you also believe that simple gestures can change the world, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. This helps us a lot to continue telling stories like Leah's. At 7 in the morning, the graphite-colored imported car cut through the city streets with almost surgical precision. The tinted windows hid the serious and untouchable face of the person behind the wheel, Dr. Veronica Andrade, 44, one of the most respected cardiologists in the country, a reference in complex surgeries, and also, as her colleague said in small mouths, a reference in coldness. Impeccably groomed, light blazer fitted the body, hair tied in a firm bun, medium heels, stare in traffic, and zero expression, neither anger nor boredom nor pleasure, just that icy neutrality that accompanied her like a shadow. The mansion she lived in was a luxury condominium, with perfectly pruned gardens, windows with curtains that never opened, and silences that echoed like muffled screams. When he entered the house, it was as if time froze, not because of beauty or sophistication, but because of the absence of life. The expensive furniture, the Italian marble, the minimalist paintings, everything there seemed to have been bought to compose a showcase, not to welcome a family. Her husband, Eduardo, an executive in the financial sector, also seemed to be part of this showcase scenario. Busy, distracted, absent, yet physically present. He and Veronica met at breakfast, but did not look at each other. The conversations were short, mechanical, almost automatic. "Are you going to have dinner at home today?" "I don't know. Surgery at 6. Gabriel asked you to help him with his duty." "I'm out of time." End of dialogue. Silence once again occupied the place of honor at the table, next to wholemeal bread and black coffee. Gabriel, the 10-year-old son, had already learned to live with that present absence. He was a quiet boy, with a curious look and at the same time restrained. He had a sharp intelligence, but he guarded his words as if he were afraid of wasting them. He lived longer with his housekeeper than with his parents, and spent his afternoons in his room, drawing cities where people smiled at each other. He drew what he never saw at home. Veronica, however, did not notice, or rather, I didn't want to understand. His mind was always focused on the next patient, the next surgery, the next scientific paper, the next medical event. Emotion, for her, were distractions. Love, something that, according to him, weakened. Smile, an unnecessary risk. Being vulnerable, a luxury that only the weak gave themselves. From a young age, she had learned to close her chest. Ironically, soon she, who operated on hearts. And the further he advanced in his career, the more he erected walls around him, walls so high that she didn't even know what was on the other side anymore. But there was one question that echoed in her mind when the house finally fell silent at night, after her husband's footsteps had disappeared into the hallway, and the lights had gone out in Gabriel's room. When did it all get so cold? She didn't speak out loud, of course. She didn't even allow herself to feel the real weight of that doubt. But deep down, he knew that something was slipping through his hands. He had status, recognition, money, prestige. But he had lost, or perhaps never had, that which warmed his soul. And it was precisely this emptiness that made her so impatient. Impatient in the office, listening to patients tell their pains with trembling voices and teary eyes. Impatient on the street, waiting an extra minute at the traffic light. Impatient at home, when he realized that Gabriel wanted to show a drawing or tell a dream he had had the night before. Impatient with everything that required time, surrender, listening. After all, Veronica's time was too valuable to be wasted on emotions. That same morning, on her way to the hospital, she braked with a faint sigh impatiently when she saw the red light. Damn traffic lights. Even more so the one, which took forever to open. The radio was off. The cell phone was on silent, and not even the luxury car could protect her from a mandatory pause. He looked ahead, then to the clock, and then, unintentionally, to the side. That's when he saw her, Leah, with her basket of flowers tied around her neck, cross the cars with the lightness of someone who already knew that territory like the back of her hand. The messy hair, the slightly loose dress, the curious, lively eyes, and that smile. Veronica frowned slightly, not because she recognized the girl, but because she didn't understand. How could anyone, in such a dirty and chaotic scenario, smile with such purity? That bothered her. There was something wrong with someone being happy there. In that condition, Leah approached Veronica's closed window and smiled. He held up a small yellow flower and pointed gently. He didn't ask for money. He didn't knock on the glass. He didn't insist. He just offered with that sweet look as if to say, "Hey, you seem to need this." Veronica did not react. He looked back at the steering wheel, pressed his fingers against it, as if he wanted to ignore what he had just seen. When she turned her eyes to the window, Leah was already handing another flower to a more receptive driver, who smiled in response. The light opened. The car moved forward. But for some reason, the girl's face didn't leave Veronica's mind for the rest of the day. Even in the face of complex exams, delicate surgeries, reports to review and meetings with the hospital board, that image, a barefoot child, smiling sincerely, offering a flower to a stranger, came back like a forgotten photograph between the pages of a book. And she couldn't explain why. That evening, dinner was, as always, silent. Gabriel drew in his notebook. Eduardo read news on the tablet, and Veronica feigned interest in a medical report. But inside there was a nuisance, as if something was out of place, as if a part of it had been touched without permission. She went upstairs to the room, washed her face, put on her dressing gown, and sat down in the reading chair. The lamp cast a soft light on the pages of a book she couldn't focus on. The image of the girl persisted, and along with it, an uncomfortable question. How could someone who had nothing radiate so much? Why did this flower, so simple, seem to carry more strength than any award she had ever received? At the hospital the next morning, an older patient commented on something curious while waiting for his appointment. He said he had seen a girl with an enlightened soul near the sign on Central Avenue, a little florist of the angels. "Doctor, that girl changes our day just by looking at it." Veronica smiled sideways, discreetly, but the comment felt like a drop of honey on an icy stone. Something inside her, even if subtle, began to move. It was still imperceptible, almost non-existent, but it existed, and this small crack in his perfectly calculated world was just the beginning, because sometimes all it takes is a flower delivered at the sign, so that the coldest heart begins, even without knowing it, to melt. The sky that morning was laden with heavy clouds, as if sensing that something quietly grand was about to happen. The air smelled of wet earth, and the streets seemed quieter than usual, as if the city was holding its breath. Leah walked with her basket of freshly picked flowers, jumping over the broken tiles of the sidewalk with the lightness of someone who carries hope in her eyes. The shabby dress that swayed in the wind did not hide the sweet and innocent glow of those who saw beauty in even the most forgotten things. He stopped at the corner, looking at the red traffic light that held back the rush of the cars. Among them, one in particular caught his attention. It was big, black, glossy, with tinted glass, the kind that seems inaccessible, like a glass wall between two worlds. But what really made her stop was the face of the woman behind the wheel. A beautiful face, made up with precision, but without color, lifeless. His eyes were fixed on nothingness, as if they were stuck in a place far away. There was fatigue, and something else. Something that not even the coldness of the glass could hide. Loneliness. Leah didn't think. He acted with the naturalness of someone who lives more with the heart than with the calculations of reason. He approached carefully, stretched out his thin arm, and showed a small yellow flower that he held gently. His smile was shy but genuine. And then, in that soft voice that sounded lulled by wind and dream, she said, "This one's for you? It seems that your heart is sad." The doctor turned her face slowly. His eyes were fixed on the girl, as if trying to understand where it came from. Just 1 second. Then the shield rose again. "I don't need your mercy." The tone was dry, almost cold, but not hard enough to erase the tenderness of the gesture. And then the foot sank on the accelerator. The car took off hard and disappeared into the corner, as if fleeing from its own fragility. Leah stood still for a few moments, still with the flower in her hand, without sadness or sorrow, just looking, as if he knew, in some inexplicable way, that that seed was sown, and that they flourish, yes, even in the driest lands. Inside the car, classical music played at low volume. Veronica tried to compose herself, but something inside her trembled in a way that hadn't happened in a long time. It wasn't anger. It wasn't bothersome. It was a twinge, a kind of echo, as if that sentence had found a tiny crack in the walls she had built around herself. And as much as she tried to ignore it, the image of that girl and her words came back like an insistent memory. A sad heart? Who was that girl to say something like that? But the thought wouldn't let her, and that irritated her. After all, she was Dr. Veronica, respected cardiologist, recognized in international congresses, a woman with a busy schedule, firm decisions, results. There was no room for sentimentality in his life. From a very early age, he learned that vulnerability was weakness, that being respected meant being firm, that love and affection did not pay bills, did not guarantee status, did not save reputations. Even so, the phrase came back. With the same delicacy with which it was said, she cut through the fences almost imperceptibly. "Your heart is sad." That afternoon, Veronica was unable to concentrate in the hospital. He got the number of an exam wrong. He repeated a diagnosis. She was harsh with the secretary. And, a rare thing, he left half an hour early. When he entered the house, he found Gabriel on the couch, his eyes glued to the video game. She looked at him for a few seconds. He had grown up. It was already past 10, maybe 11. She didn't remember for sure if he had already had his birthday that month. "Good afternoon, Mom," he said, without taking his eyes off the screen. She did not answer. He just went up the stairs. The heel of his shoes echoed through the silent house. Everything was clean, organized, decorated with sophistication. But everything there was impersonal, almost like a luxury hotel where emotions were left at the front desk. He stopped in front of the bedroom mirror. He removed the gold earrings. He undid the bun with automatic movements. And he stood there, staring at his own image. The makeup was still perfect, but the eyes, there was something in his eyes. Something she herself did not recognize. He remembered the flower, girls, of the gesture, of the smile. And a question she never allowed herself to ask began to slowly form. When, exactly, did she begin to move away from herself? That night, dinner was silent. Her husband, as always, had dinner with his cell phone in his hand. The conversations between the two had turned into instructions and agenda transfers. There were no questions. There was no, "How are you?" Gabriel ate slowly, stirring the food on his plate. She noticed, for the first time in a long time, that he looked sad. Or maybe it had always been like this, and she had never noticed. Something in her wanted to ask, but he didn't ask. The phrase still echoed, "Your heart is sad." In the room, later, lying next to an absent husband, she could not sleep. The cold walls of the house, once so secure, now seemed to tighten. That girl, where had it come from? Why had it hit her so hard? He returned to the mirror. He opened his purse. He looked for something, perhaps on impulse, perhaps as an attempt to distract himself. And there, among papers and lipsticks, she found a yellow flower. Small, dainty. She didn't remember picking it up, Maybe Gabriel would have put it in. Or maybe, perhaps she accepted the gift without realizing it. The fact is that the flower was there. And for the first time in a long time, Veronica felt deeply exposed, as if someone had looked directly inside herself and described what she herself did not dare to name. The next morning, the sun seemed to have overcome the clouds. But inside her, everything was still fog. For the first time in years, Veronica was late. Not much, only 10 minutes. But for her, this was unthinkable. He got in the car, put on his seatbelt, but didn't start the engine right away. She stood there, staring at the steering wheel, thinking, feeling. He decided to take a different path. By instinct, on impulse, and without quite knowing why, he slowed down when he passed near that same corner. He searched with his eyes. He saw no one. But something inside her had already changed. And she knew. It didn't have a name yet, but it was real. That same morning, as she walked with her flowers, Leah hummed a made-up song. The world went on as usual, but there was a lightness in the air, as if some invisible gear had made a discreet crack. The kind of movement that only the sensitive can notice. And it was exactly this kind of sensitivity that, even unintentionally, began to transform things from within, right where no one could see. The morning sun, shy and hesitant, seemed to hesitate to enter Veronica's house. The day was beginning, but inside the mansion, everything was far away, as if the air was too heavy and dense to be breathed. The silence in that house was more uncomfortable than the stillness of dawn. Something was about to explode, and Veronica felt it in the bottom of her stomach. The house had become a silent trap for some time, and somehow she knew she could no longer ignore what was happening. Her husband, as always, was at the coffee table, staring at his cell phone, as if there was no more room for conversations other than work or commitments. He barely looked up when Veronica entered the kitchen, just a grunt as a greeting. He was angry, frustrated. She knew that. The fact that he didn't seem to care about the way they were drifting away only made the situation worse. But I also didn't know how to start the conversation. He didn't know how to break the barrier that, for so long, seemed to have formed between them. "I can't believe you still have that hair like this, Veronica," he said, without even looking directly at her. "It's time for you to start paying more attention to us, to your family. Gabriel and I have been trying to reach you for a long time, but it seems that you don't notice." Veronica, who until then had been trying to keep her composure, felt the irritation grow inside her, swallowing any remnant of patience. It was always like this. The words that never came in the right way, the marriage that was in tatters, the sun that seemed more and more distant. Nothing was right. Nothing. She took a deep breath, tried to find some way to cope with the growing tension. But what came out was an explosion. "Do you think it's easy for me, Daniel?" She raised her voice. "As if I wasn't doing all this for you. Do you think I'm walking away from you of my own free will? I'm the only one who runs after everything. And no matter how hard I try, there is no recognition." She slammed the cup to the table, making the coffee splash out. "I'm tired. Tired of being the only one who cares about what really matters here." Her husband lifted his head, finally staring at her, but his gaze conveyed no understanding or empathy. It was the look of someone who feels uncomfortable for being interrupted in the middle of his routine. "What do you want me to do, Veronica? I'm not a fortune teller. There is no point in shouting. You need to stop isolating yourself, and I'm not going to keep pretending that everything is fine." He got up, threw his cell phone on the table, and left without looking back. The house was filled with silence again, but now he was heavier. The tension in the atmosphere seemed almost palpable, and in the distance, you could hear the sound of children playing in the street, as if everything around was still normal. But inside that house, nothing seemed normal. Gabriel, who was sitting in the living room, watching a cartoon that he could barely focus on, stood up. The crying was silent, but his eyes were red. He felt the emptiness around him more intensely every day. His mother seemed to be in another world, far away, and his father was always busy, always in his own universe. And him? He felt invisible, as if no one saw her pain, as if no one realized how much he needed attention. He was tired of feeling that way, tired of waiting for a word, a gesture of affection, something that would show that he really mattered to both of them. The house, which had always been so full of walls, now seemed like a silent prison where no one could hear their own feelings anymore. Despair took hold of him, and, without thinking, Gabriel took the first coat he saw, some toy, and ran out of the house, without saying a word to anyone. He didn't know where he was going. I didn't know what I expected to find outside, but at that moment, the need to escape the pain was greater than anything else. He needed to get out. He needed a place where he could breathe, where he felt that his existence was visible. The street was cold, and the feeling of being completely alone was overwhelming. He walked around, aimlessly, his eyes swollen from crying. Each step felt heavier than the last. His small, thin body was desperate to escape a feeling that he could not explain, but that suffocated him. With each passing street, the houses seemed more distant, colder. There was no one who looked at him and said, "I see you. I understand you." He didn't know how far he was from home until he started walking for so long, when he realized he was in a place he didn't recognize. He was near a traffic light, the one he always saw when he passed by the street, with its flashing red light and cars speeding by. No one seemed to notice him. No one seemed to realize that here was a child, lost and alone. Gabriel threw himself on the ground, leaning his head against the cold sidewalk. I didn't want to walk anymore. I didn't want to look for something I felt I would never find anymore. The pain in her chest seemed uncontrollable. The feeling of abandonment enveloped him in an oppressive way. He closed his eyes, feeling the tears flowing, but he no longer had the strength to get up. He didn't know what else to do. I didn't know how to end this void. But then in the distance, something caught his eye. It was a perfume, the fragrance of flowers. He opened his eyes and saw a familiar figure, a girl with a sweet smile, walking down the sidewalk with a basket of flowers. She looked at him as if she saw him for the first time, and without hesitation, he approached with the same kindness as always. "Are you okay?" she asked, with a softness that seemed to fit perfectly at that moment. She crouched down beside him, offering a flower. Gabriel looked at her with a mixture of surprise and confusion. He didn't know if he believed anyone could really care, but here she was, the same flower girl, who somehow seemed to understand exactly what he felt. I don't know," he muttered, his voice breaking. Leah, with her gentle smile, held his hand, offering the flower with a simple but meaningful gesture. Maybe it was just a flower, but at that moment for Gabriel, it was more than that. It was a small ray of light that, perhaps, could still find a way to his broken heart. And so, in the midst of pain and chaos, a simple and genuine gesture began to light the path of someone who thought he was not seen by anyone else. Leah approached slowly, her careful, almost silent steps as she watched the boy lie on the sidewalk. He seemed so small, so fragile, and the sight of his loneliness squeezed her heart. It wasn't just the cold that made him shiver. There was something deeper in his eyes, something that said he carried an invisible pain, a pain that no blanket could warm. Gabriel was there, leaning against the wall, his eyes watering with tears. His body seemed shrunken, as if trying to protect himself from everything, even his own suffering. When Leah came closer, he didn't even notice her presence. He only felt the weight of emptiness, the absence of everything he wanted, until, suddenly, she crouched in front of him, with the softness of someone who deals with something very fragile. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice low, as if afraid of scaring him. Gabriel, with his eyes still fixed on the ground, slowly raised his head. The image of Leah appeared before him as a reflection of something unexpected, a light in the midst of darkness. He looked at her, not knowing what to do, as if doubting his own perception. She was there, with the smile of someone who didn't expect anything in return, with the same tenderness he missed in his home. She, so simple and at the same time so full of humanity, seemed to be the only person who really saw him. Leah, noticing the confusion in his eyes, softened her smile, trying to reassure him. It was then that, when she saw him more closely, she recognized him. The car, the boy in that beautiful car that always passed by on the street. The same child who, at another time, seemed so far from his world. But now there he was real, And somehow, in that moment, she felt that he needed her more than anything else. "You're the boy in that beautiful car from yesterday, aren't you?" Leah asked, trying to bring a little lightness to the situation. Gabriel looked at her, not knowing what to answer. But when he heard his name being said, something inside him warmed up. It was not the coldness of indifference that he had found at home, but a genuine presence, something that touched him deeply. She had recognized him, but more than that, she saw him. She knew who he was, not by the car or by the looks, but by something much more essential, by something he felt was missing from everyone around him. Humanity. Without hesitation, Leah took her old blanket from over her shoulders and wrapped it, covering it with the softness of someone who really cares. It was a simple blanket, already quite worn out by time, but at that moment for Gabriel, it was enough. It was all he needed. The warmth of a disinterested gesture, with no ulterior motives. She took her bread, still warm from the last preparation, and shared it with him. She knew she didn't have much, but the little she owned seemed to be the most valuable at that moment. Between the breadcrumbs and the sips of water, Leah told stories, tried to distract him from the pain he carried. He talked about simple things, about the world of flowers, about the things he should have lived as a child. And somehow, her presence made him calm down, even if only for a brief moment. It was a relief he had never imagined finding there. Meanwhile, Gabriel's house was in complete turmoil. His parents, who could not imagine where he was, were now panicking. The absence of her son had generated a pain that cut, a pain that not even luxury and the appearance of a comfortable life could alleviate. They didn't know what to do or where to go. Desperate, they mobilized all possible resources. The police were called, and efforts to find him took unexpected proportions. Helicopters flew over the city, and a relentless search was launched. They were doing everything they could, but something still bothered them. The feeling that, despite all the wealth and means at their disposal, they couldn't achieve what really mattered. They couldn't find their son. Gabriel was there, under the blanket that Leah gave him, hugging the warmth of a gesture that was perhaps more valuable than anything he had ever had. In his life, where the brilliance of material things always dominated, that moment was an oasis of humanity, something he never thought he would need, but deep down, he had always known he wanted. He wasn't sure why Leah did what she did, but deep down, he knew she didn't want anything in return. She was helping him because it was part of who she was, and that was all he needed at that moment. As Leah looked at him with a quiet smile, the sense of protection she conveyed seemed to be stronger than Gabriel's loneliness. He was there, on the street, without his home, without the security of his family, but somehow he felt welcomed, not for his parents, nor for the wealth that surrounded them, but for a simple child with a heart as big as his generosity. She treated him as if he were her brother. That's how he felt at that moment. No longer an invisible boy, but someone worthy of care, of attention. And somehow it changed everything. The contrast between what Leah offered and what he was experiencing in his home became more and more evident. While Gabriel's parents, in their frantic search, were consumed by the anguish of absence, Leah was there with her few resources, but with something that in reality was much more precious: empathy. She was not helping him because she felt obligated, but because she understood the pain of the other. She knew that what he needed most at that moment was not only physical shelter, but emotional support, and she welcomed him as naturally as someone offers a warm hug. Gabriel, lying on the blanket, his stomach satiated by the simple bread, felt something in his chest that he could not explain. It was as if something was being healed within him. He didn't know if what Leah was doing for him would change his life forever, but in that moment, he knew she had touched something very deep, and perhaps that was what he needed most. Someone who would look him in the eye and see him, someone who would understand him without judgment. The day went on, and as the world around Leah seemed to spin as usual, a small flame of hope began to grow in Gabriel's heart. Something was changing, something he didn't know for sure what it was, but it was there in the simplicity of the gesture, in the purity of the empathy that Leah offered him without hesitation. He, who thought he was invisible to everyone, was now beginning to realize that true wealth was, perhaps, much closer than he imagined. The sound of a siren cut through the stillness of the street. It was a sound of relief that Gabriel didn't know he could feel so intensely. He was there, still leaning against the wall, with the blanket welcoming his body and the cold sidewalk under his feet. Leah was still by his side, watching over him as if he were a brother, her hands always ready to offer more, even though she had already given everything she had. As the car approached, Gabriel's heart jumped. It was an ambiguous moment, a mixture of relief and fear. He knew his search was coming to an end, but he also knew that when he was found, he would eventually be dragged back to the place he had fled, to the house that never seemed to be a real home. The police officer who got out of the car seemed surprised by the scene in front of him. Leah, with her old blanket and quiet smile, seemed to be more at home in that scenario than many could imagine. Gabriel, so small, seemed so vulnerable, and she, with the silent strength she radiated, was there to protect him. The policeman did not say a word of reproach, but his expression of compassion was more eloquent than any reprimand could be. It was a compassion that was born from the simple gesture of one human being caring for another, without asking why or for how long. It was something genuine. When Gabriel's eyes finally met his parents', a part of his body wanted to run, but his mind was paralyzed. He wanted to go back, but at the same time, he didn't want to abandon the peace he had felt in that brief moment with Leah. He wanted to be safe, but he no longer knew where he felt safe. Veronica, when she got out of the car, looked for Gabriel's eyes, as if she feared to see him, but at the same time needed to confirm it. When the eyes met, her chest tightened. She saw him there, finally safe, but next to someone she would never have imagined. The simple woman, the same one she had snubbed at the traffic light, whom she had turned her face arrogantly, was the one who had protected her son. Leah looked up and saw Veronica. There was no anger, there was no judgment, just a tranquil look, as if to say, without words, "I just wish he didn't feel alone." Gabriel felt an indescribable relief when he heard those words. He had been welcomed, not only physically, but emotionally, and in that moment he felt that Leah had given him what he really needed. A little piece of humanity in the midst of the sea of misunderstandings and indifference. Veronica, paralyzed by the scene, did not know what to do. The shock was so great that his words stuck in his throat. She looked at Leah, then Gabriel, and for a second she felt like a stranger in her own life. She looked at her son, her chin quivering, and the truth began to unfold in her mind. The reality that he had lost himself in his own arrogance, ignoring the value of small things, simple actions, empathy that cannot be bought. The truth about herself and her own family began to seep into her heart like a stream, without warning. The feeling that something was broken, something she no longer knew how to fix, became as clear as daylight. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. Veronica, with a gesture of humility that she herself did not understand, made a decision that even she did not believe she would be able to make. With teary eyes and a low voice, she approached Leah and, with a sigh, said, "Leah, you did for him what I never knew how to do. I think the least I can do is invite you to dinner at my house." Leah looked at her, her eyes soft and a little surprised by the invitation. She did not seek reward. She never did. But what Veronica was offering was more than a meal. It was a genuine gesture of humility, an attempt to repair something that was broken between them, something that Veronica was only now beginning to realize. Leah smiled, unhurriedly, not making a point of anything. The mere fact that she was seen, that her action touched the heart of someone who had previously seemed unreachable, was enough. She knew that a dinner would not solve everything, but at that moment, it was a necessary step. Veronica sat next to Gabriel, and the two were silent. She was still processing the huge upheaval in her life. How could she have been so blind? How did you not realize that what your child needed most was not things, but human warmth? That life shouldn't be about what you have, but about how you touch each other? The pain she felt now, the feeling of having failed, was overwhelming, but there was also something more, something she still couldn't fully understand. A thread of hope, a faint flame that was beginning to be born, like a new beginning. The policeman, seeing that the reunion was taking place unexpectedly, discreetly walked away, leaving the family and Leah alone. He knew that this moment, as simple as it was a turning point. Their story would not end here. But something had changed inside Veronica. She didn't know how yet, but somehow she wasn't the same anymore. And Leah, with her simplicity and kindness, had taken the first step to make it all happen. The police car pulled away, and night seemed to have fallen more serenely. The world still revolved around them. But at that moment, Gabriel's family was about to rewrite their own history. And what seemed like an end was, in fact, just beginning. And it was in this silence that Veronica's words began to make sense. She looked at Leah once more and unhurriedly said, "Thank you." Veronica's mansion seemed a world apart, so distant and unreachable from Leah's simple life. The high walls, the glow of the lavish decor, and the elegant furnishings reflected the life of wealth and status that Veronica had chosen, but they were also symbols of a quiet solitude. Leah, with her hesitant steps and her shy smile, didn't quite know how to behave in the face of so much opulence. She had never imagined that she would be there, in that environment where conversations flowed with formality and luxury objects were treated with reverence. The feeling of being out of place was almost palpable, but she struggled to stand her ground. She was not there to be intimidated, but to live that moment, to see what he could teach her. Gabriel, however, had none of these concerns. He seemed to be at home anywhere, always looking for fun, joy, and new discoveries. As soon as he entered the house, he ran through the hallways, excited to show him the toys he knew other boys his age would have in abundance. Every corner of the house seemed to hide a new treasure, and Gabriel, his eyes shining with curiosity, went right after a soccer ball he found near the stairs. Leah watched him from afar, a small smile forming on her face. It was impressive how that boy, who had spent so much time alone and in despair, now found himself surrounded by so many material goods. But for Leah, none of that mattered. What really mattered was what she could give of herself. What really mattered was a human connection, the affection. This, indeed, was the greatest treasure. Veronica, on the contrary, did not seem so excited about the movement. She was there, at the large dining table, preparing everything with almost mechanical precision. His gestures were quick, but careful. Everything was in the right place, as it should be. She still couldn't get rid of the feeling of strangeness caused by Leah's presence in that house. But there was something that bothered her even more, the feeling that her life, so well organized and planned, was somehow empty. She had achieved everything she had ever dreamed of, but what had she given in return? What had he done to really deserve what he had? Veronica didn't have the answers, and at that moment, she felt more lost than ever. When everyone sat down at the table, the environment seemed dense, as if the words were stuck. Gabriel talked excitedly about his toys, trying to strike up a conversation, but the atmosphere between him, Leah, and Veronica was charged with silent tension. Leah, with her calm manner, seemed to be the only one not to be shaken by the situation. She took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice soft but firm. She told about her mother, about the difficult life they led, and how, even with so little, she always felt rich in something much more valuable than anything material. She spoke of her mother with a smile on her face, remembering what she had taught her. "My mother taught me that he who loves cares. Even if we have nothing to give, love always fits into a gesture." Leah's words fell on the table like a blooming flower. Each syllable seemed to touch Veronica's heart in a way she didn't know how to explain. She looked at the girl in front of her, so simple, so genuine, and felt something breaking inside her. It was as if an invisible weight she had been carrying for so long was slowly being lifted from her shoulders. Veronica had never known what it was really like to love someone without expecting something in return, without caring what she might gain or lose. She had always lived in a world where things were measured by material value, by power, by control. But I read, Leah had something she had never had, a purity in her eyes, an unconditional surrender that Veronica didn't know how to deal with. The doctor, who had always considered herself immune to any kind of frailty, now felt a lump in her throat. Leah, with her uncomplicated and deeply human view of life, seemed to have shaken the foundations of what she believed to be true. Love, for her, has never been simple. It was an exchange, a bargain. But Leah didn't think so. For her, love was something that was given without expecting return. It was a gesture, a smile, an attitude, and Veronica, for the first time in a long time, felt the weight of her own defenses slowly unraveling. Tears began to form in Veronica's eyes, and she, almost without realizing it, put her hand to her face to try to hold back her tears. She didn't know what was happening to her, but she could no longer hold back the wave of emotions that had been building inside her. It was as if something she had suppressed for so long was finally coming to the surface. She looked at Leah, and for the first time she didn't feel superior. She didn't feel more right than anyone else. She felt shame, but also deep gratitude. Something inside her was transforming. Something she knew would never be the same again. Gabriel, who was more concerned with telling his adventures with his toys, did not notice the tension that was building between the two women, but Leah felt the change in the air. She knew that, somehow, it was touching Veronica in a way she didn't imagine. She knew that despite all the differences, something had changed, something that could no longer be turned back. She had no intention of changing anything or imposing her beliefs, but the simple words she shared were more powerful than she imagined. When dinner was over, Veronica said nothing. She was silent, contemplating what she had just heard. Leah stood up with a gentle smile and said goodbye, feeling in the depths of her heart that her role in that moment had been fulfilled. She didn't need anything else. His goal was not to achieve anything more than what he had already given, a little humanity, a little love. She knew that as hard as things had been for her, she hadn't lost the ability to care, and that, in the end, was what mattered. Veronica, looking at the table, thought of everything she had heard. Her mind was full of questions, but the biggest one was, how can I change after all that she has shown me? The night was silent, but inside, the transformation had already begun, and she knew, somehow, that Leah wouldn't be the last to show her the way to true change. In the days following the dinner, something that seemed impossible began to happen inside that mansion. Veronica, once a woman immersed in her cold and controlled routine, started to see herself in a different way. Her focus was no longer on incessant work, nor on perfectionism that prevented her from seeing life beyond her own parameters. The house that once seemed like a place without a soul, full only of material goods, began to overflow with something new, affection. She began to dedicate more time to her son, Gabriel, who until then had been just a figure she watched from afar, now had the watchful eye and careful gestures of a mother. His smile, once shy and withdrawn, now appeared more frequently as a reflection of the renewed affection he received. She spent entire afternoons playing with him, listening to his stories, and, for the first time in a long time, allowing herself to let go of the pressures of the world to simply be a mother. Her husband, who had previously felt lost in the midst of a marriage that seemed to work only by convention, also began to notice the change. He smiled more, talked more, and got closer. The conversations during dinner were more natural, more fluid. The words were no longer so far apart, as if the two people who were there, sharing the table, were in parallel worlds. The void between them was gradually filled, as if each gesture, each exchange, was a careful seam of something that had been torn for so long. The mansion, with its imposing walls and luxurious furnishings, was beginning to reflect something far more valuable than the material things it possessed. What once seemed like a fortress of loneliness and disconnection now became a home, a place where human warmth took shape. In the midst of all this transformation, Veronica could not forget Leah. She knew that this young woman had been the spark that ignited the change within her, and with a growing sense of gratitude, she reached out to Leah days later. He wanted to offer something in exchange for everything the girl had given him. But when they met, something unexpected happened. Leah, with her humility and simplicity, refused Veronica's help. She wanted nothing more than to follow her path, to continue her life the way she had always known how to do. I still want to sell flowers, because it makes me feel like I'm spreading love, she said, with a quiet smile on her face. There was no hesitation, no desire for luxury or wealth, just a pure desire to continue his mission of bringing a little color and beauty to the lives of those who needed it most. Veronica was touched by Leah's refusal, but she also understood that this girl had something she had never taken for granted, the ability to be content with what really matters. She realized that Leah didn't want the material world, She didn't want comfort, but just a space to spread her love. Leah's vision gave her a new perspective. She, who had spent her entire life accumulating wealth, now began to realize that the greatest good she could offer was her own transformation. It was a love she still had to learn to give, to welcome, to distribute. That was how, inspired by Leah's simplicity and the transformative power of flowers, Veronica had an idea that would change her life in an irreversible way. She created a social project, something that would be the realization of all the love she now wanted to spread. The name of the project, Flowers That Embrace, was chosen with great affection because it represented exactly what she wanted: to welcome street children, offering them a space of welcome, affection, and hope. She wanted these children to feel what she herself was beginning to feel, that even in life's hardships, love could still flourish. The project would not only be a physical shelter, but also an emotional shelter, a place where the little ones could feel that they were loved and cared for, regardless of their situation. Veronica dedicated herself to this cause with all her being. She knew she couldn't change the world alone, but she felt that this would be the first step on a path of true redemption. She would use her position, her resources, to do something good. And what touched her the most was to see how the project was growing and touching the lives of so many children. The flowers she valued so much were now no longer a symbol of wealth, but of love and transformation. Leah, although physically distant, felt the joy of what was happening. She knew she had left a seed in Veronica's heart, and now it was blossoming, bearing fruit that spread far beyond what she could have imagined. It was not just a change within Veronica, but something that was reaching all the people around her. The social project Flowers That Embrace was a reflection of everything that Veronica was becoming. She was no longer that controlled, rigid woman, distant from her own feelings. She was someone who finally understood the true essence of life, love in its purest and simplest form. At that moment, while the project was taking shape and the children began to be welcomed, Veronica understood that she did not need to do everything alone. She had someone by her side, a humble and true figure, who, even without knowing it, had shown her the way to something much greater. And as the flowers she and Leah were now scattering began to fill the world with color and light, Veronica knew that the true value of life was not in the things she could touch or buy, but in the impact her actions could have on the lives of others. This transformation would not be easy, nor immediate, but Veronica knew that the path was just beginning. She, who once saw herself as a successful woman, now knew that true success was in the small things, in the flowers that touched hearts, in the hands that reached out to those who needed it most. She was ready to continue this path of change, guided by a new understanding of what really mattered. Time passed, and the transformation was gradual but profound. Leah, with her humility and quiet strength, continued selling flowers, but now with renewed confidence. Veronica's support in her family became her foundation, something she could rely on, something that was no longer associated with neediness but with hope. She began to walk the streets with a different lightness, knowing that she was not alone, that people who had previously seen her as a simple flower seller now respected her, saw something more in her. Every smile she received, every look of approval, made her flowers look more vibrant, more full of life. And, as if it were a chain of affection that stretched endlessly, Leah began to visit Veronica and Gabriel's house more often. Sometimes it was just to watch little Gabriel play. Other times it was to talk, as if their friendship had been born from something much deeper than simple occasional encounters. The bond that had previously arisen from a momentary need, Gabriel's rescue in that delicate situation, had been transformed into something strong and genuine. Leah's visits became a routine, something that everyone looked forward to. Gabriel, with a spontaneous way, was getting closer and closer to Leah, considering her almost like an older sister, someone who knew how to listen, who knew how to welcome without haste, without judgment. Veronica, who once looked at Leah with suspicion, now saw in her friend a wise woman who had much more to teach than she herself imagined. The arrogance that Veronica had carried for so long, that feeling of superiority that prevented her from seeing the value in the simple things of life, was slowly replaced by a sincere humility. She realized that Leah was not just any girl. She was not just a flower seller, but a person who, with simple gestures, had the power to transform lives. And Veronica learned Finally, to live with an open heart, to look at the world without the lens of indifference that she had always used. With each passing day, she understood more the value of each moment, of each gesture. The arrogance and pride that once defined his personality had been unraveling, being replaced by an openness to true human connection. Leah, with her wisdom of life, became the teacher, and Veronica, the student. Those afternoons at the mansion, once dominated by coldness, were now filled with laughter, sincere conversations, exchange of experiences, and, most importantly, mutual learning. Veronica learned to really listen, to care in a way that previously seemed distant from her reality. And Leah, in turn, understood that her journey did not have to be lonely. What she considered to be just a way to survive was now a way to connect, to build something that went beyond the need to sell flowers. Meanwhile, the impact of Leah's presence on Gabriel's life was visible. He was no longer the shy boy who looked at the world with trepidation, but a child full of life, with his eyes shining with curiosity and joy. He hugged Leah as if she were part of his own family, as if she had been there forever. Leah's presence brought him something that he might have missed in the years. He was under the shadow of silence and the emotional absence of his parents. She was like a bridge, connecting her son to his mother's heart in a way that Veronica had never known how to do. And it was then that Veronica, with sudden clarity, saw the impact of everything that had happened. Leah, with her simplicity and generosity, had not only saved Gabriel in that moment of crisis, but, in a deeper way, had saved everyone in the house. The transformation within Veronica was so great that she finally recognized how restricted and limited her world had been before. She had lived a lifetime surrounded by pride and toughness, and it was the presence of Leah, a simple girl with her soul enlightened, that opened Veronica's eyes to the true essence of life. In that moment, she knew that the family she had, and who, for so long, seemed to be just waiting for something she didn't know what it was a family Leah had created with her love, her generosity, and her unassuming look at the world. Veronica knew, with the depth of her heart, that she could no longer live as before. The new family that was born there, from the impossible, was proof that, when you open your heart, life can start again in unimaginable ways. Leah was not just a flower seller. She was the invisible thread that united all the broken pieces, that united the pieces of a story that seemed to be lost. She was the bridge to healing, to the reconstruction of a family that, until then, seemed lost in its own selfishness. And while Leah continued to spread love wherever she went, Veronica dedicated herself more to her new mission, now with a renewed purpose. To build a real life, a life that was more than appearance, more than status. She knew that happiness was not in material things, but in those simple moments, in gestures of affection, in sincere words that came from an open heart. Veronica's mission now was to be the mother, the wife, and the friend that Leah, with her wisdom, had shown her how to be. She knew the road would be long, but she was willing to go step by step, with her eyes open to the true colors of life. And in the midst of all this, Gabriel, who had once been lost and alone, now smiled with a confidence that had previously seemed impossible. He, more than anyone, knew that he had gained more than Leah's friendship. He had gained a new life, a new way of seeing the world and the people around him. That friendship, which seemed unlikely and unusual, became the solid foundation of a new family, of a new story, where love blossomed in every corner, in every gesture, like the flowers that Leah sowed and that now spread throughout their lives. We have reached the end of another story that certainly touched our hearts deeply. Sometimes, the greatest teachers appear in the most unlikely places, like Leah, the flower girl. She had no wealth, could not offer expensive gifts, but what she had in excess was something that no money can buy: affection and true attention. And that's what transformed the lives of so many people, in a way that only love can. It's amazing how, in every simple gesture, we can change the world around us. Leah teaches us that love does not depend on what we have, but on what we are. And, more than ever, it is what we are that matters to others. If you identify with this message and believe that love is still what moves the world, leave a comment below saying, "Love still exists." I'd love to know what you think of this story. And if you've made it this far, don't forget to leave your like. It's always good to know that you've been with me every step of the way. Oh, and there's a video here on the side that tells a very similar story, with more lessons about life and the power of love. Click on it and come continue this conversation with me. See you soon.